Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. How the heck are you? We are about starting spring now. So is it springish where you're at? I am so ready for spring. You know, even though I'm in San Diego, we've had a ton of rain this season. And yesterday morning, we have wild parrots where I live. And I heard the parrots in the morning. And even though it rained, it felt like a spring morning. And I just had that sense in my body of how differently spring feels. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the weather. This episode with Jen, we talk about, I had a little miscommunication with my son last night. And I don't want to say too much about it because I talk about it more in the episode, but this is really to talk about what went on for me around it. And this is a pattern that happens for us quite often where he calls and he needs something and I don't attune with him. My husband is much better at attuning with him when it comes to these type of things. And we talk about why that is. And I really had some disempowered parts that came up around this. Jen and I should really not stop recording because we sometimes have the most rich conversations when we stop recording. We talked a little bit after we stopped. And so I'm just going to share some of the insights that we had when we stopped recording that you can keep in mind. I think part of what happens is I'm also Daniel's safe person. So it's much easier for him to get angry or frustrated with me than he can't really do that with this situation that we're going to talk about. I also think that he does some projecting. And I think he was having some fears and concerns, and I verbalized them in what felt like an affirming way. But I think because when he reaches out to me, he's wanting reassurance and I don't attune to that. And then when I tell him what I think is a factor of reality, that ties into what his unspoken fear is. And so he puts it back on me. And as challenging as that is, the people that are the closest to us are the ones that sometimes are going to have the hardest times and the hardest relationships because we feel safe enough to do that. So that extra little bit of context just helped me. But I think that the episode is relatable, the things that came up for me, the wounded parts, and then trying to figure out maybe what I can do differently in the future. And what do you do when you're working with someone? My son is young and he still has some maturing to do. And I'm not saying that he's not mature, but we often have relationships with people where our level of insight, awareness, communication is different. And so how do we make those adjustments? I think that's all I'm going to say. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hello, my dear. Oh, how am I? I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah, feeling pretty centered this morning. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
How are you?
I think, fingers crossed, I think I'm coming out of burnout, at least for yesterday and today. And I'm holding it really lightly. Like if I drop back in, it's okay. That I don't want to do this in or out. And what I'm really have learned and I'm appreciating is to just lean into it and to let it be what it is and to kind of let that be the new norm if I'm not able to do things. But I went to Aquafit yesterday for the first time in forever. It was interesting. I wanted to push through for the whole class and I was tired. And my friend said, "How are you doing?" And I said, I'm tired. And she said, "This is soup, Jean."
Mm-hmm.
She's like, "You probably don't want to push it." And as soon as she said that, I kind of felt like relief.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to push. Because my thinking was I don't have anything today. So if it knocks me out, I'll just be out. But I don't think that I really considered that what if that creates a setback for a couple of days and can I really afford that? And I felt really relieved. And then it's interesting. I'm way overdue for a haircut because I've been sick and I didn't want to, get anybody sick. And I had an appointment for Friday. Scheduling is so hard for me. I don't know what it is. And because I swim, I don't want to wash my hair on the day that I swim because I'd come home and shower and then have to get just all of these considerations. It's just a lot. So it took me 30 minutes to book an appointment. And the person that cuts my hair lives in the neighborhood. He has this garage converted to a salon. And so I just texted him and said, "I know this is really last minute. Any chance you can cut my hair this morning? And if you can't, it's okay." I have this thing of I'm being pushy. I really shouldn't ask, the nerve of me to ask, right on the spot. And he's like, yeah, come on over. I'm like, I'm in my bathing suit and my bathrobe. Is that okay? He's like, yeah.
I love this.
And it just felt like such great care because my bangs have been really bugging me and I'm way overdue. And it's just so interesting, this push-pull between having wants and needs, pushing boundaries, asking for what I want, allowing people to say no, giving them permission to say no. It's just fascinating all the way around.
I've had that confounded. That's really relatable. Where when we don't feel like we have the right to say no if someone asks something of us, that we then project that and feel like we're being pushy or imposing when we're just letting the people we, move through life with know what we're needing.
Yeah.
Right? That's a beautiful thing to like unhook. And it almost like I can feel it viscerally, like when it popped apart for me, like, oh, this does not equal that. And to really be able to sit with and challenge some of that. So yay, you. And it worked out. And yeah, that feeling of coming out of burnout, I love how you're holding it. I'm hearing, right, with patience and curiosity and, anything in nature is kind of this like, you only go up a couple degrees, right? As we're, late winter right now, getting into spring here in Philadelphia. And so, I mean, every once in a while you get this crazy day that's like really warm, but generally it's a little bit forward, a little step back, and being able to experience that without freaking out, which is, I don't know, in my experience, no better way to bring it all back on is just to be afraid of it and reactive to it.
Right. Well, I think there are two things that come to mind. One is if you have a PDA profile, pervasive drive for autonomy, called pathological demand avoidance, where we really need to have a lot of autonomy and low demands. We also want that for other people. If that's what we struggle with, then we want that for other people. And I used to think it was my people pleasing because in the text I said, like, if it's not okay, if you're busy, no pressure. But that's also my value. And you and I were talking about something unrelated beforehand. I want to try and stay on task, but I want to say part of what you were saying, and you said this to me the other day in Apollo, like if I want to take the podcast another way and I don't want to have you on as a co-host anymore, like you're okay with that you really give people permission to do what works for them in their lives because that is your value for yourself. Not very many people do that. And that is a gift.
Thank you for that.
You're
reflection.
welcome.
Yeah, it is really interesting because I would have always called that people pleasing. And I don't know, there's not a single time that I don't make a request where I'm like, it's totally okay to say no to this, but you're right. Like it is that when we look at it through a lens of like, what is my cherished values, right? Freedom is definitely one of them. And other people that I also hold that for other people as well. It's not just my freedom that matters.
Right. And the second thought that I have is if you struggle with chronic illness, if you're in burnout, if you're fatigued, if you are neurodivergent, I think that we have this tendency to look at what the Neuro-Normative standard is and think that we're supposed to meet that all the time. And then anytime we don't, what we're aware of is the deficit for where we think we're supposed to be and where we are. And I think that's incredibly harmful. And had I done that during burnout, I would have been going like, when am I going to exercise again? When am I going to be able to be back to full-time, whatever? When am I going to be able to go out? When am I going to? And what I did is like, what if this is just the norm for right now? What if this is where I'm at right now and that my job is to rest and to stay home? And if I shower, I shower. And if I stay in my pajamas, and I really drop the bar. And I find for many neurodivergent people that when we can drop the bar and not have any expectations, then whatever I do from that ground zero up is like, oh, I did 20% today, as opposed to if the bar is at 100, then I missed it by 80%. And I think that that can be a really powerful tool. And that kind of feeds into what we're going to talk about today. But I want to give you a chance to respond.
You're just making me think of the last time I was in a really deep burnout. And for the first part of it, I think you really helped point this out to me. My like quote unquote answer to the burnout was, I'm going to feel better if I get all this stuff off my to-do list.
I remember that.
Which was like whipping me back into the burnout. It was like, hey, no, go like really, even now, like I do these mini like power downs.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of being like, why isn't my brain working the way I want it to work? It's like, look, my brain is not coherent right now. I actually texted that to someone last night. Like, I'm not sure I can put together full sentences right now. And I powered down, let myself rest. And then my brain was actually, I've been doing these puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Times, I did this spelling bee. I'm like, okay, it's back on. Like I got my first like genius level on something.
Mm-hmm.
Like my brain's right there. I just got to give it what it needs.
Right.
And the same thing with the rest of my system, right? And sometimes I think burnout is this, at least my experience was that invitation to really go into a deep rest and reset and restorative and let go of all that pressure. I love what you said. Like if I can accomplish 20%, it's not a negative 80 right now, depending on what it is that I'm needing.
Right.
It's beautiful. Right. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. What I want to talk to you about today, and Jen, you and I debated about whether or not to talk about this, and I do, but I really want to be very mindful about what my intention is in this. I had a little blip last night with my son around communication. My intention for talking about this is to talk about what came up for me, because I think it's really relatable. I think if you have kids, if you have partners, if you have multiple people in relationships and we compare ourselves to other people, different skill sets, but this is in no way to throw shade at my son. He's a young kid. He's had a lot going on, a lot of stressors, poor guy. And he felt really bad afterwards. I still think that there are some areas where, because I'm 60 and he's not, I may see things differently than he does. And so he may have a little bit more of a fixed view. I don't think any of his friends listen to this, but if you do, I don't think it would be kind to share that, you heard me talk about him. If he finds it, I may end up telling him. But think about what your intention is for sharing, because my intention is to talk about what went on with me. And I can't really do that. And we talked about, like, should I make this up as a friend? But because I have some things that go on with my husband's relationship with him, it would have been very difficult to hide his identity. But I love my kid. He's a good kid. So, please give him lots of grace in this.
I like how you said that. I mean, if I can just add a little something, because I know one thing that's been really valuable in our friendship is creating space where this isn't about the other person, right? This is about what you are experiencing, your growing edge, which of course is going to be different as a 60-year-old woman than a 20-something, year old. What do we call them? Kidults, affectionately, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is you.
Thanks.
Giving each other that space has been such a gift in relationship to create that. So I see you doing that here. And that's a great reminder. The more I'm able to practice that in my relationships right now, it's just very enriching. I feel like I know my people better and I know myself better.
Yeah.
When we can separate that out a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. I also feel like I'm still in the middle of it. I haven't really had a chance to process with you. I polled you about it last night. We haven't discussed it. I'm still a little bit muddy. So I'm really in the middle of this as well. So it's possible that in another week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, I'll look back and go like, I have a totally different perspective. But part of being human and transparent is letting you see what's going on in the moment, knowing that this is my truth for this moment and it can change in the next moment.
Absolutely. Showing ourselves that kind of grace is always a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's hop to it. The dynamic in our family is my kids come to me for medical things when they have very big things. If they have relationship issues, I'm the person that they come to. My husband is amazing. This son in particular, it's Daniel, so we're just going to say it, calls Steve. Daniel tends to, like I did when I was younger, get very upset about things very easily. And sometimes in my perspective, it's not rational. That's my judgment. Steve is amazing at being able to be with him in the moment and let him be where he's at and provide the support that he needs. Steve has this amazing gift. And I think part of what happens for me as a therapist, I can do this for everybody in my life except for my child. What goes on for me is historically, this is a very extreme example, and this isn't a true example, but like he could call and say aliens are invading space and, you know, they're coming to the house and we have to hide everything. And I want to be clear, my son is not delusional. He's not paranoid. If you have people in your life that are, this is not in any way being disrespectful. My intention is to illustrate that in my mind, he says things that feel very extreme to me. And like my husband would be able to go like, oh, okay, so tell me about the aliens and, you know, what are you going to hide and where are you going to put it? And this is not a very good example, but I want to ground about like, are you sure they're aliens? Like, let's talk about this. And that's not helpful for him when he's in this place. Mm-hmm. And my husband has this amazing ability. However, and Daniel and I have talked about this, and I really try and take a beat and slow down and see where he's at and try and meet him where he's at. I don't do a very good job of it. I just don't. I wish I did. And I have some shame and embarrassment around that because was a licensed therapist for 17 years. I do coaching now. I'm amazing with my clients and my friends, and I cannot do this with my own child. So that's part of what goes on for me. Daniel had this thing going on, and he was waiting to hear back, and they needed to schedule him for some training. And he had given them his availability, and they wanted him to train when he wasn't available. He's in school full time. I think he's got 17 units right now, and he's working. I mean, the kid is amazing in what he's doing. And he had let them know that he wasn't available, and I hadn't heard back from them. In retrospect, what he needed when he called me was for me to say, it's fine, it'll work out. I'm sure, you know, they're just figuring it out. That's what he needed. Did I recognize that in the moment? Of course not. And I knew that this was going on because he'd called Steve to talk about it, and he called me right before he had class. I had something going on. So it wasn't a long phone call where I paused and said, what are you needing? And because I knew what was going on, I'd already thought about it. And from my 60-year-old perspective, what I said was, if they're not able to accommodate the schedule that you gave them for training, then this is not the job for you because they're not flexible. And you want to work for a place that has some flexibility and some grace. This ties a little bit back into what we were talking about of starting from 0 up as opposed to 100% down. That my perspective is you want to work for a place that has some flexibility. And if they don't have that, this just isn't the place for you. We have this conversation. I can tell he's annoyed. I ask him, he's like, yeah, I already talked to dad, and dad also blah, 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 blah. And he hangs up and he goes to class. And I'm like, oh, it happened again. He calls me later on, and I'm not even thinking about it. And he says, you know, I'm really sorry about what happened. This is what I heard you say. And what he heard me say was, this job is trash because they don't respect his schedule. He shouldn't have the job, and the job is just yucky, and it's a totally bad thing. I'm appalled and astounded because that is just not where I was coming from. And I got defensive because I thought I was being your grounded mom, giving you permission that if it doesn't work out, this isn't about you. This is about a system that doesn't work to meet human needs. I get defensive, then he doesn't understand why I'm angry. And then he always asks, are you crying?
Love Daniel.
No, I'm crying, but if I was, it would be okay. And then Steve is in the room because we're on speakerphone. And then Steve jumps in to diffuse it and starts asking Daniel what he's going to do tonight, you know, to switch gears. And now I'm frustrated because I feel like, Steve is taking over. He's talking over me. And this is what Steve is good at, but we're not done yet. And then that irritated me. So we ended up, Daniel apologized. I'm like, you don't have anything to apologize for. I kind of couldn't figure out what was going on. I just knew I was incredibly activated, and now I'm mad at Steve, and now I'm feeling really inadequate. And Daniel kept apologizing. I'm like, we're going to have bumps. Being a family, being in relationship, we're going to have bumps. I want to be able to talk about it. I want to be able to work it through. It's okay. We hung up. I didn't feel good. And then I cried to Steve, and then Steve was reassuring me, but in this young, dysregulated place. And I said it to him. I just felt like he's just placating me the way that he placates Daniel. You know, I'm saying there are aliens on the roof, and he's like, tell me about the aliens. And it was just a really painful place. And although Steve reminded me that the kids call me when something is important, what I said is I feel so much pain and confusion because Steve has this ability to attune to them in a way that I can't. And he intuitively responds to them, and they consistently reach out to him. And in this wounded place, I didn't say it, but what I wanted to say is like, you just should call your father from now on. I obviously can't give you what you want, so you may as well just call your father. Unless it's something medical or serious, just don't even call me. I didn't say that. That's coming from a very young, wounded, rejected part. I was able to shepherd that part and not act out. But how often do we do that in relationships? Fine, then don't ask me. Don't go with me. You know, we do these extreme things. But it was incredibly uncomfortable. And I still really wasn't able to parse out what was going on and what happened. And I usually am able these days to have a pretty good bird's eye view of what's happening. And all I know is I got really activated. It triggered a lot of wounds. A little bit later on, Daniel called. It is kind of funny because he's like, yeah, after I spoke to Dad, I talked to my girlfriend to, tell him how Dad didn't meet my needs. I didn't even tell her about you. And Steve and I laughed that in any other family, that would be offensive to hear. Like, I talked to somebody about how you just didn't do it right. This is just how our family is, and we're totally okay with it. And even though I still didn't really understand what was going on, I just made a commitment to staying calm and detached and telling him that it was okay and we're all good, and that maybe he and I can try and take a beat, in the future and see what it is that he's needing. But I'm confident that this will happen again.
I love how you guys are all, your willingness to stay in connection, even in your confusion and bewilderment and the overwhelm or, emotional experiencing, right? Because we're deep feelers, deep thinkers, and we can get really bewildered by things. But that willingness to hang together, to stay open, stay curious. I've always admired your parenting and the closeness that you experience with your kids. And it's a thing to stay close even when stuff is up. Because, of course, stuff is going to be up.
Yeah, thank you. I have a feeling, too, that I'm the truth teller in the family. And not everybody always wants to hear the truth. I mean, I talk about we're the canary in the coal mines, and people don't always like the canaries. And obviously, if I would have known what he needed, it's not that I have this need to go like, I'm the adult and I want to give you my perspective. I really want to meet his needs, but it is so frustrating and disappointing to me to not have that intuitively with him, and that this is like a rinse repeat. It doesn't happen super frequently, but this is a pattern with us.
I'm also curious about you and Steve as like a unit too, right? Like, I often think of the empathic communication, right? That feeling felt, which I hear you. It can be very easy. I find that it's a lot easier to do with clients because there's a distance that's just there. It's inherent in the relationship versus with like our children. It can be a lot harder to take that step back, especially when we feel that sense of responsibility on a whole other level with kids and kidults. But if, sometimes if Steve, I often think of that empathic. So empathy, right, there are two different skill sets, right? There's empathy and then there's empathic communication, communicating that empathy, right? And that feeling felt. And usually the signal with kids or anybody for that matter is that like relaxed, like, yes, you understand, you get it. And I think of it as like paving the way for then the feedback, right? Then the, well, have you thought of it this way? Or do you want my opinion on that? Maybe this isn't the right place for you. And the paving is like the receptivity to hearing that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, sometimes you guys can kind of tag team a little bit that way. Like, so no offense to Steve, but now I'm going to blame it all on him because he didn't pave the way for you.
No. And I totally agree with you. And Daniel had called Steve and Steve was out, and then he called me. So it's not like we were together and we could work together, and Daniel generally calls Steve. But I guess what I'd be curious to know from you, because you know me, some of my wounds. Are you able to help me with my part in this? Because I know I got really activated, and I know I've got wounded parts that are like really frustrated that how come I can't attune to my own child when my husband can? Or how to work with those parts. I mean, really anything that you have to say, but you're one of the few people that I don't feel tense when I ask you for feedback. You know, that thing of you're going to tell me something about myself that's going to devastate me. Like, what am I missing?
Well, I mean, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about your context, right? Coming out of burnout, spending these weeks having an illness. I'm thinking about Daniel's context and the stress involved with being a young adult and that kind of push-pull of wanting and needing your parents, but then also wanting and needing your independence and your power and your knowing that you can figure it out for yourself. And to me, it's interesting that Steve wasn't available in that moment. And so it's kind of like some of that prep work that you guys as a family unit do so well. If that's usually done by the time he gets to you, he's in a more receptive place to hear your wisdom about things. And that's not what happened this time. And when you experience a pattern where your kid is prepared to hear it and respects it, which I think is more your norm, and then suddenly that pattern shifts, I know how much you love and care about your people. And I think we all have this desire to be able to be everything to them. And then when the pattern shifts, I know we can take it really hard.
Yeah.
Right. And the sort of, what did I do wrong? How am I not good enough? Like all of this stuff. And I think the answer to that is some like humility. Like, you know, you did the best that you could. You are in a context, right? So don't decontextualize yourself. Like keep yourself in your context. And I know I run this trope too, where it's like, if I disappoint someone, the more I love that person and feel responsible for their happiness. Sometimes like just rip my heart out of my body, just rip my heart out of my chest. Like it's so painful. And I think that then sets off the storm, right?
Yeah.
And we do need to take space. I mean, how many times in our polos or in our FaceTime that it's just, you know, space is not something to be afraid of. The pause, the hesitation, the, hey, I have to take a minute and then let's regroup, because you come, and we've done this for each other many, many times, and you can't really put a lid on it. You just have to howl. Yeah. And we're howling just about all kinds of things, but not the least of which is like, it's just so hard and confusing.
Well, and two things that I'm thinking about. One, the wounded part of me felt like I can't even be myself around him. I'm going to have to monitor. I'm going to have to, I went into a very disempowered place because I really felt going into that conversation, I had no idea that this would happen, and it felt very reasonable. But as you're talking, I'm thinking things that, and he had a couple minutes before he went into class, I had a client. So in my mind, this is just a casual, hey, what do you think about this? And what I failed to see, and maybe what I need to do is like, did you call your dad? How did that go? Not great. Okay, so he's needing something that he didn't get. What are you needing from me? Because I think that he gets very worried and concerned, and he just wants to be reassured. And oftentimes what I want is information grounds me, but information creates more worry for him. And so it means me being more mindful about where is he at and what he needing, even when it catches me off guard. And it's something that feels incredibly innocuous to me, that I forget what it's like to be 23 years old and have all the things that are going on for him. And if you've got ADHD, which he does, I just saw something yesterday. I heard that it takes until you're 25 for your brain to fully develop. I saw something yesterday that said 35, and I don't know if it was a typo or if there's new research out. But, having emotional regulation and knowing that the world is a safe place when you're living on your own. And I will tell you, I did not move out permanently until I was 24 years old. And this kid moved out for college and moved back for a year, but has been living independently, working, taking a full-time load. I could never do that. So the things that he is managing and navigating, I never had the capacity to do. So I want to just put that into context as well.
Yeah, as you're talking, I mean, I'm even thinking about a conversation I had with one of my children yesterday, and I was a little distracted trying to get there. They had a telehealth appointment, and like these sharp edges, right? And so it's being open to like receiving that feedback, right? And, or even seeking it out. Because I was saying things and she clearly just needed me to just hear her and not interject. And I remember like kind of looking at her and just being like, whoa, okay. So and then not taking that personally, right? I think there's a really big piece here. I mean, I love there was a meme going around that was like, if you knew the degree to which everyone was projecting all the time, like you would never take anything personally ever again. You'd also realize every time you receive a criticism, it's actually a confession, right? So sometimes when people are lobbing things at us, like they're really telling us like what is going inside, on inside of them. And of course, we're kind of receiving it and we're like, as if they were telling us something about us, but they're not. They're telling us something about what's in them. And then we wonder we just get so bewildered and hurt. And that wound, I mean, you and I have both been around each other's attachment wounds long enough now that, they are so sharp and so convincing and just needing to kind of howl about them. But then when it's paving the way again, like it's almost like there's like a physics of it or a developmental trajectory of it that you can't put the cart before the horse, so to speak, right? And to be able to take that bird's eye view and just be like, what's the next step right now?
Yeah.
And do that without judging any, like remembering we're verbs instead of nouns. Like you can't judge anything by like a single snapshot of a process that a family is going through, or a relationship is going through, and judge it based on something that is static and one snippet in time. It's really like this flow and a dynamic. And so I think we get into this, and time can do it. Like also the element of time in your story, he's heading to class, you're heading to a client, he has a real material problem, and you give input, and then we've got these like really rich emotional lives that need to be also spoken to and held and all of that, and often time doesn't allow. Right.
And ideally, we'd love to be able to not take things personally and to be able to detach. That is the goal. And the reality is, if you're neurodivergent, like my son and I, we sometimes have reactions. We get dysregulated.
Totally.
Like that's just the human experience. And so when that happens and it's not ideal or perfect, how can we be okay with that and do rupture and repair work, knowing that there is a very good chance this dynamic will happen again? And can I be okay with that?
Yeah. I mean, we can't therapy our way out of being human. It's like that houseplant metaphor, right? Like we're going to get dried out. Like we're just going to need a rewatering. So I will sometimes, especially in the parenting realm, like joke with clients. I'm like, look, I have been at this for so many years. I've read so many books, right? I have 6-figure student loans at one point, and all of this, and I completely lose my shirt and can't do it because you are, depending on a lot of factors, and not the least of which is how hydrated am I? How well did I sleep? How much emotional speed? How much emotional availability do I have? And I think perfectionism will keep us from being able to admit that. Like I've certainly told I had asked her come up and wanted to talk to me about something and was feeling kind of sad, and I had no space for it. And then maybe, I think I've even mentioned this on the podcast, like a half an hour later or something, I was able to acknowledge, I'm like, I was not emotionally available for you.
Right.
I wasn't. And it's almost like unapologetically, like, of course, I wish I would be all the time, but I'm a human being, and that's just not on offer. It's not.
Yeah.
But I am now, right? I'm here now. We did run out of time. It was nighttime, and we ended up just sort of curling up together, and I guess in each other's energy and that kind of comfort as opposed to talking about something. Sometimes when you take that pause, I remember like one of my lifelong friends now, we were in a point in our 20s and we were not talking. We had some sort of big falling out. It's so funny. She's like she's a really good friend and has been with me for many, many, many years. And we were at a funeral for a friend, a mutual friend. And the only thing we could do that day was sit in silence together and hold hands. And that's what I mean when I reflected earlier about your willingness to be in your bewilderment.
Yeah.
And still be in relationship. And it can be really messy. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it can still be beautiful. And that still is the work of being in a relationship. That's not a failure. It's just that's the nature of being, imperfect humans loving each other imperfectly and having grace.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which you have in spades for your kids and for yourself. And I experience with you, and a lot of trust in that. A lot of like, just because I can't see the light right now doesn't mean it's not coming back.
Yeah.
Or things won't become clear later.
Well, thank you very much. It was helpful for me. I think talking about it helped me see what I can do differently next time. And that's just really helpful. And I love my kid. And I think a lot of the pain was about like, I want to be there for him. And when I'm not and I can't and I miss a tune and then my husband does, where I feel like I'm really good at attuning for the most part. It just is painful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I just hate being far away from you. I'd love to give you a hug right now.
I know. I wish you were here.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Jen.
My pleasure, my dear. I'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Hey again. So was that relatable? Do you have relationships, whether they're with your kids, grown kids, adults, other people, where these kinds of things come up and you just get activated? Was it helpful? Did you get any insight on what might be helpful in the future? And if not, that's okay too. If you are interested in working with Jen, you can reach out to her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I have a form on my website that you can fill out and I will get back to you. I think that's pretty much all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. You have a right to have conflict. You have a right to misstep. You have a right to get your feelings hurt. You have a right to get activated and triggered. You have a right to detach and stay calm. You have a right to choose to not engage if it doesn't work for you. You have a right to attune, to not attune, to communicate, to miscommunicate. Whatever is going on for you is okay. And if you're struggling and things are hard, that's okay. If you're suffering and not doing well, please reach out and get help. I think there's a certain level where being human, we are going to struggle, but I want to be clear that I never, ever, ever, ever want anybody to be unsafe or to be suffering. And if you need help, please reach out and get support where you can. If you're feeling joyful and fulfilled and content, it's amazing. And if you're struggling and that's not where you're at, that's okay too. Where can you find some comfort and safety today? I think that's all I have. Have a blessed day.